How's it going, everyone? So since the draft is now finished and we're a few days post-draft, in today's video, I want to go over and give my draft grades for every single Packers draft pick and then overall a draft grade for the entire draft class of all 13 players. Now, let me start off by saying and clarifying, draft grades right now don't really mean anything. None of these players have played a snap in the NFL, so if you give a player an A+, he could still go into the season and be a complete bust and really never amount to where he was drafted. So today, my grades aren't based off of what I think they'll do in the NFL. It's more so where the Packers selected them compared to consensus rankings, how they fit into the Green Bay system, and then also based on the positions that they needed, what they ended up drafting. Of course, it's a good idea to wait about 3 years to really grade a draft pick. Then you get a good idea of what that player is or will become. But for today, we're just going to be doing grades based on all the things I mentioned, because it's still fun to get this out here and then maybe go look back at it in a year or two and then see what the difference was. All right, so let's get it started and start with their first pick in the first round. They selected at 13 overall after trading Aaron Rodgers, swapping 13 and 15, which I think did wonders and allowed them to select Lucas Van Ness, edge out of Iowa. Now, a lot of people this pick were going draft JSN, myself included, but with how day 2 went, I'm not going to give Lucas Van Ness a worse grade because he's not a wide receiver. I think the Packers addressed that wonderfully in day 2, so getting someone like Lucas Van Ness, who, yes, is going to take a little bit to develop, I think is an excellent selection at pick 13. It reminds me a lot of the Rashawn Gary pick, where a lot of people are saying he didn't have much production, he's not going to amount into much, he's a developmental player, and now Rashawn Gary's one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. I think Lucas Van Ness could become that. He has every tool to do so. He's super athletic, he's tall, he's 6'5", a 9.39 RAS with a 4.58 40. He's just a super fast, rangy type of edge player and also has some inside-outside versatility. He played some inside defensive line at Iowa, but where he was best was on the edge, so that's primarily where he will fit into the Green Bay Packers defense. But if we remember a couple of years ago, the Packers also used Zadarius Smith right over the center and did some pass rushing sets with Zadarius Smith basically at defensive tackle, and I think they could also do that with Lucas Van Ness in future years. Now, based on consensus, Lucas Van Ness was the 3rd rated edge player, just behind Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson, and that's exactly where he went at 13. Then the Jets selecting Will McDonald at 15, Myles Murphy at 28, and Nolan Smith at 30. Now, I thought Nolan Smith and Myles Murphy would be closer to Lucas Van Ness, but clearly a bunch of other teams passed on them as well, where I don't think Lucas Van Ness would have lasted to anywhere close to 28. In terms of the Packers' needs, they had a big needed edge rusher, so this was a great pick. I think this filled a very big need the Packers had with Rashawn Gary with his torn ACL. We don't know when he'll return. This might possibly be Preston Smith's last year in the green and gold. Kingsley Enagbare, a great draft pick last year in the 5th round. They also have Justin Holland, but they definitely needed to add an edge rusher into this room early, and they did exactly that. So since Lucas Van Ness, I think, fits in the Green Bay defense wonderfully, was right around exactly where his consensus was, and also fits a Packers big need, I'm giving the Lucas Van Ness draft selection an A grade. Before getting into the next player draft grade, let's first grade today's video sponsor, Manscaped. Manscaped has long had elite downfield play with their Lawnmower 4.0, but in 2023, they have their rookie sensation Beard Hedger to ensure the face of your franchise is a pretty one. This 1-2 punch of men's grooming is the best acquisition of any at-home GM. So quickly head to manscaped.com and save some salary cap using code BASS, B-A-S, to get 20% off your order and free shipping. That's right, the Beard Hedger and Lawnmower 4.0 are the franchise-changing combo that will have you looking at your roster with pride. Everyone that watched the Super Bowl knows what can happen with poorly managed grass. That type of ball playing field quality will never happen with the Lawnmower 4.0. This trimmer was a 1st round consensus draft pick. You've done all the dirty work. Now it's time to make sure you look good out there with the new Beard Hedger with its 20 points of precision trimming. They just sent me the brand new beard trimmer here, and it does have just 1 guard, but also 20 points of precision trimming, and I really, really like it. In the NFL, having a deep offensive line may be a good thing, but in the bathroom, having more than just 1 guard is just a mess. Plus, its tough titanium blades and single stroke efficiency can have you go from a bushy Matt Patricia to a sleek Sean McVay in no time. If you haven't upgraded your grooming tools already, head over to Manscaped for a champion worth roster reset. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com using code BASS. Again, 20% off and free shipping using code BASS, B-A-S, at manscaped.com. So for all those reasons mentioned, Manscaped gets an A+ draft grade. Moving on to the second round, where the Green Bay Packers had 2 draft selections. At their first selection at pick 42, they stayed put and drafted tight end Luke Musgrave from Oregon State. Now, I loved day 2 as a whole because the Packers addressed a big need, and that is getting Jordan Love weapons, and Luke Musgrave is exactly that. He is a weapon. Now, there is some concerns with Luke Musgrave. Very limited production, a very raw blocker, but what you're buying into is the upside and athleticism of Luke Musgrave. He could be a wonderful move, athletic, receiver-esque type tight end in the NFL if he does indeed reach his ceiling. And I think Luke Musgrave has a very high ceiling. He was one of the most athletic tight ends in this draft, a 9.78 RAS. He's 6'5", almost 6'6", and runs a 4.6 140, but I think he honestly plays faster than that, and he's also super explosive with a 36-inch vertical and a 10'5" broad jump. Now, Luke Musgrave was the 6th overall consensus tight end, the 3 tight ends going before him, Dalton Kincaid, Sam Laporta, and Michael Mayer. So he was the 6th consensus, but he was drafted as the 4th overall tight end. Obviously, we saw what happened with Darnell Washington falling all the way to the 3rd round. And in terms of the need at tight end for the Green Bay Packers, I would argue that was their biggest need at tight end, and obviously they addressed that early, drafting another one in the 3rd round. So the need was there. The need was definitely there. I figured they'd draft a tight end very early. They could possibly even have done it in the 1st round, say if they had traded back into the 20s. But, you know, we fully expected a tight end in day 2 if they didn't draft one in day 1. So I thought the need matches perfectly, especially considering Luke Musgrave is that athletic type of tight end that they haven't had in a very long time. And I was just very happy that the Packers finally got someone like that. So the need was perfect. The draft fit in terms of consensus was very close, and it's a super athletic tight end build. The only concern is the lack of production, and it's kind of a risk going into it, a development type of risk, and that's kind of risky for your 2nd round draft pick. So because of that, I'm giving the Luke Musgrave draft selection a B+. The next pick in the 2nd round, the Packers ended up trading back twice from 45 to 48, then 48 to 50, and selecting wide receiver Jayden Reed from Michigan State. And I'm not going to lie, when they selected Jayden Reed, I was a little bit shocked, and that's simply because I didn't know about Jayden Reed. So when I look into prospects for the Green Bay Packers, specifically wide receivers, a lot of the time I'll see guys under 6 foot, and I'll kind of just simply write them off because the Packers rarely draft receivers under 6 foot. The last couple, Amari Rodgers, obviously Randall Cobb in 2011. So I didn't know much about Jayden Reed, so I was a little bit shocked at first. But I'll tell you what, after the 2 days of doing research on Jayden Reed, this might actually be my favorite pick in the entire draft because this gives the Green Bay offense exactly what I've been begging for multiple years. A versatile twitch type wide receiver that can run crisp routes, has pretty good speed, and overall can just be used in a multitude of different ways in this Green Bay offense. And I think Jayden Reed will be a big part of the Green Bay offense as early as his rookie year. Now, in terms of consensus here, throughout the 10 biggest draft boards online, Jayden Reed was the 18th ranked wide receiver. And that's just the average. He was super high on ESPN and CBS, where he was very low on NFL Draft Buzz and NFL.com. There was a wider range on Jayden Reed, but if you look more into him, a lot of people said he was extremely underrated, and he might be one of the best wide receivers in this draft class when it's all said and done a few years down the line. Saying he's very complete and he's a very pro-ready wide receiver, a really good route runner, shifty, good with the ball in his hands, and can even go up and catch a contested catch, even though people consider him undersized. Reed's almost 5'11", 187 pounds. He had a nice 40-yard dash at 4.45, but honestly, I do think he plays a lot faster than that, and a really nice 20-yard split, 10-yard split as well. Reed also has inside-outside versatility, but I think aligns more as a slot receiver with the Green Bay offense, but they can use him in many different ways. They can put him out wide and use Christian Watson in the slot for slot fade concept, so they can move a lot of their receivers around, which is what the Packers want, but I do believe at the end of the day, Jayden Reed will get more of his snaps in the slot than out wide. His freshman year at Western Michigan, he was a slot wide receiver and had nearly 800 yards and 8 touchdowns. Then in Michigan in 2021, he had 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. Last year, a bit of a down year, but the Michigan State offense was just bad in itself with only 636 yards and 5 touchdowns. But he was by far the best player on their offense, and it showed. The Packers had a pretty significant need at wide receiver with only Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, the two receivers with significant snaps. Moratori did get some snaps last year, so addressing a wide receiver early was a must. So based on the need, the type of player, and the consensus, I'm giving the Jayden Reed draft selection an A- grade. Moving on to the third round of the draft, the Packers double dipped into the tight end room, selecting Tucker Kraft out of South Dakota State. And this is definitely one of my favorite picks in the draft. I really love the Jayden Reed selection, but I really loved the Tucker Kraft selection from the moment it was announced at the podium. I love the Packers going and attacking that tight end position. This was a super deep tight end draft, grabbing a super athletic tight end like Luke Musgrave, then going back the very next round and drafting more of an inline, strong, blocking, but also a nice receiving tight end in Tucker Kraft. I think was perfect execution of rebuilding that tight end room. And if you just call Tucker Kraft an inline blocking tight end, that is a very big understatement because this dude is an athlete as well. 9.68 RAS, almost 6'5", 254 pounds, ran a 4.6 940, has a 10'2" broad jump, and ran a really nice shuttle cone of 4.28. And again, reiterating, even though they already selected Luke Musgrave, tight end was still a need, even with Luke Musgrave on the roster. They only had Josiah DeGuara, Tyler Davis, and other undrafted free agents such as Austin Allen on the roster. So adding Luke Musgrave, an athletic guy, Josiah DeGuara is more of that H-back, fullback type of tight end, Tyler Davis, a special teamer. They still needed an inline tight end to replace Mercedes Lewis. So I thought getting two tight ends in this draft was a given. I wasn't sure if they were going to do it as early as the third round getting two tight ends, but the fact that it was Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, two of my favorite tight ends in this draft, I think was awesome. A lot of people thought Tucker Kraft could even sneak into the second round, and also said if this was a different year and it wasn't such a loaded tight end group, Tucker Kraft would certainly be a second round draft selection. So based off consensus, need, and the type of player they got, I'm giving the Tucker Kraft draft selection an A grade. With the Packers' fourth round selection at pick 116, they went defensive lineman Colby Wooden out of Auburn. Now, this was the point in the draft where I was wondering what position are they going to go next? Would they go safety? Would they go offensive tackle? They ended up going a defensive lineman, which again has inside-outside versatility, just like the rest of the guys before him. Colby Wooden played edge at Auburn, but also played inside defensive lineman, 3-tech, 5-tech, and that's where he really excelled. When he played interior defensive line at Auburn, he actually led the SEC in pressures. He's 6'4", 273 pounds, and is an athlete, 9.24 RAS, 4.7 940, so a super fast player that, you know, still has the strength to go inside, play into your defensive line, but has extreme athletic ability. He totaled 29 tackles for loss and 14 sacks the last 3 years at Auburn, and that's all while playing different positions in that Auburn defense. The consensus on Colby Wooden was the 98th best player overall, so getting him at 116 was also excellent value. In terms of need, the Packers had a huge need at defensive line. I was saying it the entire mock season that I think the Packers are going to address defensive line early, losing Jerron Reed and Dean Lowry. That was a lot of defensive snaps they lost, losing both of those players, and that needed to be replaced. But I also thought they could have gone safety here or offensive tackle, but I am also very happy with the Colby Wooden pick, and I think he will fit into that defensive line very well with Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, and TJ Slayton, and will add another level of athleticism into that group. So based off of consensus, the player, and the need the Packers had, I'm giving the Colby Wooden draft selection a B+ grade. Now, here is where it starts to get interesting. You might be thinking, you're just giving all these players high grades because you're a Green Bay Packers fan. And to be fair, you know, it's opinionated, and I really liked the beginning of this draft. The first 4 rounds, I think the Packers killed it. Where they started to go off a little bit was here in the 5th round at pick 149, drafting quarterback Sean Clifford from Penn State. Now, don't get me wrong, the Green Bay Packers needed to draft a backup quarterback. I just wasn't expecting it as early as the 5th round. And if it was the 5th round, I was expecting someone way different than Sean Clifford. Yes, the Packers met with Sean Clifford, but I kind of expected this guy to maybe be a pick in the 7th round and most likely be an undrafted free agent signing by the Packers. Now, to be fair, there was a run on quarterbacks before this pick. Clayton Tune, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, 2 quarterbacks I really liked and would have loved to see as a backup for the Green Bay Packers. So if one of those was available and they selected one of them, I wouldn't be as angry. It's just Sean Clifford, he's not the biggest wow type of prospect, especially to choose in the 5th round. Now, Clifford is a nice athlete with a 9.4 RAS and had a ton of experience at the quarterback position at Penn State. But at the end of the day, he was the 415th ranked consensus player, and the Packers selected him at 149. I truly don't believe that another team would have selected Sean Clifford maybe until late in the 6th, early in the 7th at best. Not to mention, Sean Clifford is actually older than Jordan Love, and Jordan Love was drafted in 2020, 3 years prior. Clifford will be 25 years old in July, whereas Jordan Love will be 25 in November. So yes, this does give the Packers quarterback room some needed experience, considering it's going to be a 25-year-old rookie by the time the season starts, but he did have over 10,000 passing yards, but he kind of had an interception problem where he had 86 touchdowns, 31 interceptions. Like I said, the Packers had a need at quarterback, but I felt that could have been addressed in the 6th or 7th round, and I feel like this 5th round draft selection should have been really used at the safety position or offensive tackle. I think this would have been an excellent selection for Antonio Johnson at safety or Daniel Scott out of California, 2 players that went after Sean Clifford. So based on this super reach, the player himself, and the Packers' need, I'm giving the Sean Clifford draft selection a D grade. And the only reason it isn't an F is simply because the Packers had a need at backup quarterback, and Sean Clifford does have a lot of experience. The Packers had a 2nd pick in the 5th round at pick 159. Due to the trade in the 2nd round, trading back from 45 to 50, and the player they selected in the 5th round was Dontavian Wicks, wide receiver from Virginia. This is a player I mocked to the Green Bay Packers probably the most, and I got this one exactly right. I felt like this guy was going to be a Green Bay wide receiver, and they selected him right in the 5th round, right exactly where I kind of had him being drafted. Now, Wicks is another very intriguing wide receiver prospect. I liked the way the Packers went and attacked the wide receiver position in this draft. It wasn't their typical 6'5", 4.35 40 type of guys. They drafted more technical, route savvy, sure hands, quarterback's best friend type of wide receivers, and I love that. And Wicks still is a great athlete, a 9.17 RAS, 6'1", 206 pounds, and that's even with a very poor 40 at 4.62, where the Packers had him tested and he runs more of like a 4.5 40, not a 4.62. And just like Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks had a wonderful 2021 season and kind of a down year in 2022. In 2021, Wicks went for 1,203 yards and 9 touchdowns, whereas in 2022, 430 yards and only 2 touchdowns. And a lot of people were surprised that Wicks didn't enter the draft after 2021. And if he had, Wicks probably would have been a 2nd round draft selection. And just like selecting Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, I love selecting Dontavian Wicks as a complementary wide receiver to Jaden Reed, where Jaden Reed has versatility outside inside, and I see as a slot receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Dontavian Wicks played basically all outside wide receiver for Virginia, and I think will be a perfect addition there with Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs at outside wide receiver. And the Packers, even after drafting Jaden Reed, still had a need at wide receiver. It wasn't a huge one. They technically could have got another guy in the 6th or 7th round, which they actually got a 3rd guy as well, but I love the Dontavian Wicks pick. He's a player I've liked more recently than early in the draft process, and then when I started to do more research on him and realized the numbers don't say everything, is simply a really good football player, and very similar to Jaden Reed, where if you watch the tape, it speaks a lot more than just looking at his stats and his athletic profile. Wicks was the consensus 133rd ranked prospect, and the Packers got him at 159, so also really good value there. So based on the type of player he is, although he had a down year in 2022, the Packers' need, and the consensus of the player, I'm giving the Dontavian Wicks draft selection a B+. The Packers had 2 selections in the 6th round. The first one was also from the 2nd round trade down, since the Packers traded down twice, once with the Lions, once with the Buccaneers, and their second player after Dontavian Wicks. From that trade, they drafted Carl Brooks, defensive lineman from Bowling Green. And man, I love this pick. I think this is going to be this year's Kingsley Enagbari, where you're going, this dude should have been a 3rd round draft selection. How in the world did the Packers get this player this late? Now, he didn't really test well. He had a 5.87 RAS, but there were reports that he was sick while testing. And this just adds much needed depth to the defensive line, drafting Colby Wooden and Carl Brooks. Carl Brooks more of that bigger defensive lineman at 6'3", 303 pounds, and Colby Wooden more of that undersized, more athletic build that has versatility. So just like the tight end and the wide receiver position, I think Carl Brooks complements Colby Wooden wonderfully, and the Packers did that very well in this draft, doubling up on certain positions with players that complement each other very well. Carl Brooks was the definition of a pass rushing machine. His 5 years at Bowling Green totaled 167 total tackles, 27.5 sacks, and 46 tackles for loss. Carl Brooks was the 110th consensus player on all big boards, and the Packers got him at 179. And honestly, I think 110 was kind of an overrating, and I think he could go even before that. The only reason he was 110 is because there is an outlier with ESPN ranking him at 183, but we have websites such as CBS ranking him at 67, MDDB at 87, Sports News at 90, WC Gridiron at 96. The list goes on and on and on. So the only reason he's even at 110 is because of that outlier. Karl Brooks should have not lasted to the 6th round. So based on the need at defensive line, which the Packers still had, they lost basically 2 starters and drafted 2 guys. The type of player he is and where they got him based on consensus, that's why I'm giving the draft selection of Karl Brooks an A+. Now, after making a wonderful selection in the 6th round, let's come back down to planet Earth a little bit for their second 6th round selection at 207. They selected kicker Anders Carlson from Auburn. And this was another draft selection that just didn't make too much sense to me. Yes, the Packers had a need at kicker. Mason Crosby's not on the team anymore. Although they could still bring him back, they have yet to give his number away to someone else. So they could still bring back Mason Crosby, but to draft a kicker here in the 6th round where they had 4 7th round picks, just doesn't make too much sense to me. I feel like they could have addressed safety or offensive tackle this pick, which they have yet to do to this point in the draft. And I don't know if another team would have drafted Anders Carlson. Yes, he has a lot of experience at Auburn, but got replaced by a freshman last year due to his inconsistencies. And yes, he does have NFL blood. His brother, Daniel Carlson, the kicker to the Raiders right now. He was a pretty inaccurate kicker over his career at Auburn, only making 71.8% of his kicks. And overall, I felt like he would have been an undrafted free agent, and the Packers could have brought him in anyways as an undrafted free agent and not had to use a 6th round selection on him. And typically, if you draft a kicker in the 6th round, you should go, okay, this is our guy. This is 100% our kicker going into the season. But you don't feel that way with Anders Carlson. The Packers still have Parker Wright, an undrafted free agent from last year on the roster, who honestly could win that kicking job anyway. And the Packers could bring in another guy, a veteran, or some other guys in minicamp to compete with Anders Carlson. And to be fair, Anders Carlson could not be on the roster come the start of the season. So that's why I kind of saw it as a wasted pick here. And they definitely could have waited with the whole 4 picks they had in the 7th round, or just simply an undrafted guy. So for all those reasons, the Anders Carlson draft selection in the 6th round gets a D-. And similar to the Sean Clifford grade, it's simply not an F just because they did have a need at kicker. With their first of 4 7th round selections, the Packers at 232 selected cornerback Carrington Valentine from Kentucky. Now, I like this pick based on them getting a rangy, quick, physical cornerback, outside guy to add into that cornerback room. Super athletic, a 9.3 RAS with a 4.44 40 and a very nice vertical 39 inches and 10'8" broad jump. I thought Valentine was excellent value here in the 7th round. Now, although he was the consensus 246 player, ESPN had him at 121. So I thought it was awesome value in the 7th round, getting a guy that will be in that cornerback room, an outside guy, but mainly can start as a special teamer and has the physicality and speed to do so. I thought the Packers were going to get a cornerback in this draft, and I felt the 6th or 7th round fit that primarily. So for all those reasons, I'm giving the Carrington Valentine draft selection a B+ grade. For their second 7th round draft selection at pick 235, the Packers went running back with Lou Nichols III out of Central Michigan. Now, this pick, I'm not a huge fan of. The Packers, I thought would draft a running back. I just don't know if the value really fit here for Lou Nichols. I feel like this guy, again, would have been an undrafted free agent and a guy they simply could have just signed after the draft. There was a running back that went in the 7th round after him, and Kenny McIntosh, that I would have much rather had, and I think would have fit the build better for the Green Bay offense as a 3rd or 4th running back. And then there were also some undrafted guys such as Keaton Mitchell, who the Packers actually met with, which I would have rather have seen selected here, and Sean Tucker, who also went undrafted. Lou Nichols was the 299th consensus player, so drafting him at 235, again, I thought was a reach, and he probably would have been an undrafted free agent. He was as low as the 365th player on MDDB. And I'm not saying Lou Nichols is a bad player. I think he offers a lot. He's a versatile guy. He's a good runner. He has good vision, and he can also be a receiving back. But it wasn't a huge need for the Green Bay Packers to go ahead and reach for a guy in the 7th round. And I know that's kind of silly to say, reaching for a guy in the 7th round. It's pretty much just drafting a guy that's, would be a priority undrafted free agent anyways. And you don't have to go through the whole process of trying to sign him from another team. But again, there was other options there that I just think would have fit a lot better for the Packers. So based on the player, the consensus, and the need, I'm kind of like at a grade with Lou Nichols, so for that reason, I'm giving the Lou Nichols draft selection a C grade. For their third pick in the 7th round, the Packers finally addressed the safety position, drafting Anthony Johnson Jr. at pick 242 out of Iowa State. A former cornerback converted to safety this last year at Iowa State, Anthony Johnson shows great physicality and really converts to a box star role type of safety. And honestly, I love Anthony Johnson. I think the value is excellent there in the 7th round, but I kind of wish the Packers would have addressed the safety position a little bit earlier, like that Sean Clifford spot or the Anders Carlson spot. There was a lot of guys available that I would have loved on top of getting Anthony Johnson in the 7th round. So it's nothing really against Anthony Johnson. It's more so the Packers kind of neglecting that need until the 7th round, drafting Anthony Johnson. I feel like safety was one of the weaker positions on the Green Bay Packers team. Yes, they have Darnell Savage and Rudy Ford and signed Tarvarius Moore and have Dallin Levitt, but I feel like they could have added, more talent into that room earlier in this draft. But like I said, I think the value for Anthony Johnson Jr. himself was excellent here at 242. He was the 191st consensus ranked player, so awesome value there. He was as high as ranked as 90 on PFF and 109 at NFL.com. And I truly do think Anthony Johnson could end up being a starter his first year as a 7th round draft pick. And that just speaks volume to how good he is and how weak the Packers safety room actually is. So based on all of that, I'm giving the Anthony Johnson draft selection an A-. The only reason it's not higher is simply because I thought the Packers would address it sooner. With the final draft selection in the 2023 draft for the Green Bay Packers at pick 256, they went for a third wide receiver, Grant DuBose from Charlotte. Now this one I also like. I didn't necessarily think the Packers needed to draft 3 wide receivers in the draft. I kind of felt like they could have drafted 3 tight ends instead of 3 wide receivers, but I'm not mad at this pick because Grant DuBose shows a lot of upside for a 7th round wide receiver, very similar to Samori Toure last year. The upside is definitely there. He's a good athlete, an 8.7 RAS. He's tall, 6'2", 201 pounds, ran a 4.57 40, but I think he plays better than that. And similar to Reed and Wicks, this guy is a technical type of wide receiver, knows how to run routes really well. He's smart, he has solid hands, and is a quarterback's best friend. And with how big of a question mark is on the wide receiver room, I understand the Packers drafting 3 wide receivers in this draft and just seeing what group they can put together to surround Jordan Love with talent. Grant DuBose was the consensus 203rd ranked player, so getting him at 256, again, excellent value in the 7th round. The Packers did good on 3 of the 4 guys, getting them excellent value in the 7th round. He was as high as 179 on PFF. Now the Packers have a plethora of wide receivers to go into minicamp, OTAs, and preseason to really evaluate what that room will end up looking like, the 5 or 6 guys that end up on the 53-man roster. Obviously, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks are all roster locks. I would assume at this point Samori Toure would be as well, and Grant DuBose could fight for that 6th spot between him, Bo Melton, and Jeff Cotton. So based on the need, the type of player, and the consensus, which was excellent value in the 7th round, I'm giving the Grant DuBose selection a B+ grade. So those are all 13 picks and the grades for each individual player. So now I want to grade the overall draft. I feel like the Packers did a very good job at addressing multiple needs. They had very big holes at tight end, defensive line. They also had need at edge, wide receiver. They did have needs at quarterback and kicker, which they did address, which, way too early in my opinion based on the players they got. They got 3 wide receivers. They got a running back, which they didn't necessarily need to draft with Tyler Goodson and Patrick Taylor still on the roster, but I kind of saw it coming anyways. So overall, I'm giving the Packers 2023 draft class a grade of an A. I am very happy with this draft. The players they got, a little bit different than most years where we're kind of just looking for wide receivers that are 6'5", super fast, and they really don't address the tight end position, whereas this year they address the tight end position. They drafted more technical wide receivers that I think will help Jordan Love a ton going into this season with the way they run routes, the way they find holes in the defense, the way they get open, and the way they can catch the ball. And in terms of the defense, getting super versatile guys, tons of value with Carl Brooks, versatility with Colby Wooden, and just an overall really nice edge rusher in Lucas Van Ness. I think they did an excellent job on defense. And then in the defensive backfield, Carrington Valentine offers, a rangy cornerback, outside cornerback. Anthony Johnson Jr. could potentially become a starter. The Packers should have addressed safety a little bit earlier, but I am happy with the Anthony Johnson Jr. pick overall. So that's why I'm giving the Packers an A grade. I really, really like this draft. But I want to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I know this is a long video, but there was a lot to go over. The Packers selected 13 players. They needed to add talent to this roster. So I'm glad they used all 13 draft picks after making that trade in the second round. I thought maybe they'd move around in the later rounds and maybe end up selecting 10 or 11 players, but they ended up selecting 13. The Packers needed that going into the future with Jordan Love. But that about does it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you went down, left a like on the video, and then also if you're new here, click subscribe for more daily Packers content. But I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and as always, go Packers.